When your own daughter tells you you're an extra mouth to feed, silence becomes your last dignity. That sentence has echoed in my head every night since the day it happened. My name is Diana McAllister, 62 years old, retired hospital accountant from Round Rock, Texas. I've spent most of my life balancing numbers, salaries, expenses, insurance claims. The one equation I never thought I'd have to balance was love and pride. When my husband David passed from a sudden stroke last spring, everything I'd built for 40 years went quiet overnight. The house felt too large for one person and too full of ghosts. Every room had his scent, his laughter, his coffee mugs. I couldn't sleep in our bed without turning to the empty side. So when my daughter Laura said, "Mom, why don't you stay with us for a while?" I thought it was love talking. I sold the house, kept what I could fit in 2 suitcases, and drove south to Austin, thinking I was driving toward family. The first thing I noticed when I arrived wasn't the welcome, it was the hesitation. Laura hugged me quickly, but her husband Kyle barely looked up from his phone. He muttered something that sounded like guest rooms that way. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, modern gray furniture, no trace of warmth. I told myself I'd stay only a few months, help them out, maybe cook, keep things tidy. That's what mothers do when they feel in the way they try to become useful. So I cleaned, I folded laundry, I fixed the leaky faucet. I even paid half the utilities without them asking. I thought it would help. Instead, it seemed to irritate Kyle even more. He'd roll his eyes when I asked simple things like where the trash bags were. Sometimes, if I turned the TV to a cooking show, he'd change it to sports the moment I left the room. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone. He didn't know I was standing by the hallway. "Yeah, man, it's weird. Her mom's still here. Feels like a roommate we didn't sign up for." He laughed. I froze. My hands were wet from washing dishes. I wanted to confront him, but I didn't. I told myself Laura would defend me if it ever came up. She didn't. That evening, I cooked chicken casserole, Kyle's supposed favorite. The kitchen smelled of thyme and baked cream, and for a moment, it almost felt like family again. We sat at the small wooden table, Laura scrolling through her phone, Kyle drinking beer, the hum of the refrigerator louder than our voices. Halfway through dinner, Kyle leaned back in his chair, fork dangling. "You know," he said, "maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not contributing. We've got bills. We didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My throat tightened. The casserole suddenly tasted like chalk. Laura's fingers stopped scrolling, but she didn't look at me. "Kyle," she started. He raised a hand. "No, really. It's been months. We can't keep this up." I turned to Laura, desperate for one word, just one. But she kept her eyes on the table. "Maybe it's best, Mom. If you find something more stable, for everyone's sake." I didn't argue. Grief teaches you when to stop speaking. I stood, carried my half-eaten plate to the sink, washed it, and dried my hands slowly so they wouldn't shake. Then I walked to the guest room, closed the door, and began to pack. 2 suitcases. That's all my life had come down to. I folded the clothes I had just washed that morning, slid a framed picture of David into the side pocket, and zipped the bag. My breath felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from disbelief. I could hear them whispering in the living room, their voices muffled, but their silence afterward even louder. When I opened the door, Laura was standing there, eyes glossy. "Mom, maybe just for a while, until things settle. You know Kyle's under pressure at work." I smiled a small, practiced smile. "Don't worry, dear, I understand." She reached out as if to hug me, but stopped halfway, her hand frozen in the air. I stepped past her. The hallway smelled of takeout and lemon cleaner. At the door, Kyle pretended to check his phone. He didn't even look up when I said, "Thank you for letting me stay." He replied flat, "Good luck, Diana." The words hit harder than I expected. Diana. Not Mom, not Mrs. McAllister, just Diana. Like I was some stranger who had overstayed her welcome. Outside, the night air was sharp, the Texas wind cutting through my thin coat. I dragged the suitcases down the front steps. The sound of the wheels on concrete was the only applause for my exit. I reached the curb and stopped. My breath made little clouds in the air. Across the street, porch lights glowed in other homes, families, laughing TVs, flickering dinners being cleared. Life went on everywhere except where I stood. A drop of rain hit my cheek, then another. Within seconds, the drizzle turned into a steady downpour. I looked up, letting the rain wash over my face, half hoping it would hide the tears. I told myself not to cry here, not where they could see. Dignity doesn't need an audience. I waited, thinking maybe Laura would come out. Maybe she'd say she didn't mean it. But the door stayed closed. The only sound was the faint hum of traffic and the clink of bottles from the neighbor's recycling bin. When the cold started to bite, I pulled out my phone. The battery blinked red. I searched for nearby motels. Lone Star Inn, 1.4 miles away. Vacancy. I pressed call, asked for one room. The voice on the other end sounded bored mechanical, $85 a night, cash or card. I dragged my bags to the corner bus stop, rain dripping from my hair. A man offered me a plastic poncho. I thanked him, voice breaking. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion, the kind you give someone who looks too clean to be homeless, but too broken to be fine. The bus came 20 minutes later. I climbed on, dropped a few crumpled bills into the slot, and sat near the window. The glass was foggy, reflecting my face back at me, older than I remembered, smaller, too. As the city lights smeared past, I whispered to myself, "You raised her better than this." The bus stopped at a red light, and through the rain, I saw it. Laura's apartment balcony. The curtains were drawn. A warm glow spilled out silhouettes moving inside. Kyle lifted his beer, said something I couldn't hear, and then he closed the curtains. That was the moment something inside me cracked, then cooled like glass meeting ice. When the bus moved again, I didn't look back. I pressed my forehead against the window and let the rhythm of the wheels drown the ache in my chest. I reached the motel half an hour later. The sign buzzed in flickering neon Lone Star Inn. The clerk barely glanced up as I signed the receipt. The room smelled of old carpet and disinfectant. I dropped my bags, sat on the edge of the bed, and took a deep breath. I told myself I'd cry later, but tears didn't come. Only silence. Heavy, absolute silence. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, I realized something I'd never dared admit before, that sometimes family isn't who you live with. It's who doesn't lock the door behind you. I looked toward the rain-blurred window. A faint reflection of my face stared back, tired, wet, but still standing. And that's when I heard it. The faint metallic sound of a door clicking shut in the distance, echoing in my head. Click. The sound of being erased. The carpet smelled like damp air freshener and old smoke. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV playing some late-night sitcom laugh track. Lone Star Inn, a name that sounded braver than the building looked. I dropped my 2 suitcases on the floor and sat on the bed. The springs groaned beneath me. A single lamp flickered near the window, casting a yellow halo on the peeling wallpaper. It wasn't home, but it was a roof, and tonight that was enough. I took off my coat, hung it on the rusty hook behind the door, and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. My hair stuck to my forehead. My mascara had run down to my cheekbones. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Widow. Guest. Burden. The words echoed like labels someone else had stuck on me. Then came a knock. Sharp, fast, too confident for housekeeping. "Hey neighbor, you new here." A woman stood in the doorway wearing pink curlers, leopard pajamas, and the biggest grin I'd seen in weeks. "Rita Gomez," she said, holding out a bag of microwave popcorn like a peace offering. "Room 108. Don't worry, honey, the roaches only come out after midnight." I blinked. That's supposed to make me feel better. She laughed loud and warm. "You'll get used to it. I call this place the halfway house for broken hearts. You look like you belong." I wanted to be offended, but something in her tone, half teasing, half kind, made me chuckle for the first time in days. We sat for a while, 2 strangers with nowhere else to go. She talked more than I did, her ex-husband's 5th wife, her son in San Antonio, who calls every Thanksgiving like clockwork. When she laughed, she slapped her knee so hard the bed squeaked. Anyway, she said, finally standing up, "If you hear yelling from room 106, ignore it. That's just Carl and his emotional support parrot. I actually laughed. Good to know. When she left, I locked the door, turned off the TV, and sat in the quiet. The silence after company always felt heavier than before. I opened one of my suitcases and started unpacking folded sweaters, my husband's watch, a small tin box of keepsakes. I'd carried that box through every move of my life, but hadn't opened it in years. Tonight felt like the night. Inside were letters from David when he was still a medical student, a dried flower from our wedding bouquet, a faded photo of my parents, and a small leather-bound book, brown, cracked at the spine. My mother's handwriting on the cover, E.M. 1969-1973. I held it like it might fall apart. My mother, Evelyn, had passed when I was 22. I barely remembered her voice, just her perfume, lavender and starch. She was a secretary her whole life, steady and modest. The idea of her keeping a diary was surprising. I sat on the bed and opened the first page. March 5th. Cloudy again. Harold came to the office early. He looked tired but smiled when he saw me. I know I shouldn't notice things like that, but I do. I frowned. Harold. The next entries grew stranger, more emotional. Mentions of dinners, long walks, apologies. And then one line stopped me cold. He said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a business, a name to protect. Margaret will never know. She must never know. My stomach dropped. Margaret. No, that can't be right. I read it again. Then again. My mother never mentioned a Margaret in our family. I flipped forward, my hands trembling. June 14th. He came again today. I told him I couldn't keep taking the envelopes, but he insisted. Said it's for the child's future in case he's not around. He said a lawyer will know what to do. A. Grant. I don't want to believe this life is a secret, but I suppose it is. I felt the air leave my lungs. A. Grant. That name so familiar it felt like a ghost whispering. Avery Grant. He wasn't just a name in a diary. He was real, a lawyer. My husband's old friend from Rotary meetings, a man who'd sent flowers when David passed. I snapped the diary shut and sat there staring at the wall. The hum of the motel's vending machine outside filled the silence. Could my mother have known that Avery Grant? Could Harold have been someone important? I whispered the initials from the diary aloud, HJS. It sounded like a signature from a different life. A man with a family, a business, a name to protect. I opened the book again, flipping through pages until another entry caught my eye. February 2nd. He said he made arrangements. If anything happens, there's a trust a letter. Mr. Grant will know. I only hope someday she understands why I did what I did. I closed the diary, pressing my palm against the cover, as if I could feel my mother's pulse beneath it. The woman I'd thought I knew, quiet, predictable, suddenly felt like a stranger. A knock startled me again. "Everything okay in there?" Rita's voice floated through the door. "You've been awful quiet. Either you found Jesus or something juicy." I laughed weakly. Maybe both. She opened the door a crack, holding a can of root beer. "Well, which is it?" I hesitated, then held up the diary. Something about my mother. She mentioned a lawyer I actually know. Her eyes widened. "Is he rich?" I blinked. I don't know." "Why?" She grinned. "Honey, if I found a rich man's name in my mama's diary, I'd call before the ink dries." I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard, tears stung my eyes. "Rita, you're impossible." She winked. "No, baby, I'm practical. Now you call that lawyer. Maybe your mama left you more than good manners." When she left, the laughter faded, leaving me alone again with the soft buzz of the lamp. I stared at the phone on the nightstand. My thumb hovered over the keypad. Avery Grant. If it was the same man, what would I even say? "Hi, my dead mother wrote about you in her secret diary." The idea felt absurd, but the longer I hesitated, the more curiosity burned through the fear. I flipped the diary back open to the last page. A final note scrawled in shaky ink. "Truth has a way of finding its own voice. All you have to do is listen." I looked up at the ceiling at the water stain shaped like Texas and let out a slow breath. Maybe this wasn't about money. Maybe it was about understanding who my mother really was and who I might be. The vending machine hummed again outside the same steady rhythm as my heartbeat. I reached for the phone, typed Avery Grant, Dallas, attorney, and the name popped up immediately on the search screen. The same one I remembered. Gray hair. Still alive. Still practicing, it seemed. My hand trembled. Don't be ridiculous, I told myself. He won't remember you. He won't care. But then I thought of Kyle's face at dinner, the contempt in his voice. Extra mouth to feed. If my mother had hidden something all her life to protect me, maybe it was time I stopped being quiet too. I dialed the number. The ringtone buzzed once, twice, 3 times. My heart pounded in my throat. Then a voice answered, calm, measured, older. Avery Grant speaking. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The morning I called Avery Grant, I didn't expect him to answer. I thought maybe a secretary would pick up, ask me to leave a message, and that would be the end of it. But when that steady, familiar voice said, Avery Grant speaking, it felt like time folded over itself. Mr. Grant, I said, my voice catching, you might not remember me. My name's Diana McAllister. My late husband David used to know you. Rotary Club Round Rock maybe 15 years ago. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. Ah yes, the accountant with the best potluck brownies. I exhaled. That's me. What can I do for you, Diana? I hesitated, then told him about the diary, how I'd found my mother's name and his, and a man she referred to only as HJS. The other end of the line went quiet. Then I heard the faint sound of paper rustling. Evelyn, he said almost to himself. So it finally found its way home. I'm sorry, you'd better come see me, he said gently. This isn't something to talk about over the phone. The next morning I boarded the 8 a.m. Greyhound to Dallas. I had only my handbag, the diary, and a packet of crackers from the motel vending machine. The bus rattled over the highway, and every mile felt like it was carrying me toward a truth I wasn't sure I wanted. Mr. Grant's office sat in a quiet strip mall that smelled faintly of printer ink and nostalgia. His name was still etched on the frosted glass, A. Grant, attorney at law, retired but curious. When I stepped inside, he was already waiting. Avery Grant had aged like good wood lines, carved deep but strong eyes, sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. He rose from behind his oak desk, smiling warmly. Diana McAllister, he said, shaking my hand. You have your mother's poise and her stubborn chin. I'm not sure that's a compliment. Oh, it is, he said with a laugh. Evelyn was one brave lady. He motioned to the chair across from him. On his desk lay a thick manila folder sealed with a brittle wax stamp. So she told you about Harold, he said. Not exactly, I replied, sitting down. She just wrote about him. A man with a family, a business, a name to protect. And then there's you, apparently the keeper of a secret. He folded his hands, the smile fading into something gentler. Yes, I made a promise to both of them, your mother and Harold James Sterling, that if she ever passed without telling you, I'd make sure the truth reached you eventually. The name hit me like a chord struck too hard. Harold James Sterling, the founder of Sterling Energy, one of the biggest oil companies in Texas. I'd seen that name 1,000 times in the papers growing up. Awards, charity galas, obituaries. He died 25 years ago. You're telling me, I said slowly, that my mother had an affair with Harold Sterling. Grant nodded. She loved him, Diana, and he loved her in a way that complicated men sometimes do, silently, fearfully, but deeply. When you were born, he wanted to claim you, but his wife was pregnant at the same time. The scandal would have destroyed both families, so he made arrangements, a private trust. He asked me to guard it until the day you came asking. I sat back in the chair, trying to breathe. The air felt thick, too heavy for the small room. He opened the folder and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed and yellowed with time. Evelyn was one brave lady, he repeated softly. And you, my dear, are her daughter and his heir. He slid the envelope across the desk toward me. Inside was a single-page letter in a man's elegant handwriting. To my daughter, Diana. If this letter finds you, it means courage runs in your blood. I could not give you my name in life, but I give you what I can in death. A piece of the company I built and enough to start your own life free from anyone's pity. Forgive me for my silence. Men like me always learn too late that love without honesty is just cowardice. Tucked behind the letter was a small stack of documents, bank statements, trust details, and a printed total. I blinked. $1,238,000. I laughed. Not out of joy, but disbelief. So I said my mother's scandal paid for my eviction. Avery chuckled, eyes twinkling. No, Diana. It paid for your freedom. I sat there in silence for a long moment, the weight of the letter pressing into my hands. My mind raced how to feel, what to think. Shame, pride, shock, gratitude, they all blended into one dizzying swirl. "Would you like some tea?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "Got any coffee?" He smiled. "Of course. Decaf." I gave him a look that made him laugh again. "Real caffeine, please. Justice tastes better with caffeine." He poured us each a cup. The smell filled the room, rich, strong, grounding. "You know, he said your mother came to me once after Harold's death. She wanted to destroy the papers. Said she didn't want you to ever know. I told her the truth has its own patience. Looks like I was right." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Why didn't you reach out sooner?" "Because I didn't know if you were ready," he said simply. "People need to lose something before they see what was always theirs." For a man who claimed to be retired, Avery still talked like a philosopher in a courtroom. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a thin silver key. "This opens a safety deposit box in Dallas. The trust documents are there. You'll find accounts already in your name and a modest investment portfolio. It's not a fortune, but it's solid." I took the key, staring at it like it might disappear. "You mean to tell me I've been living in a motel eating crackers for dinner, while a millionaire version of me was sitting in a vault?" He chuckled again. "That's one way to put it. Life has a sick sense of humor." "It does," he said. "But now you get to write your own punchline." For the first time in months, I smiled without guilt, a small, genuine smile that felt like air after drowning. Avery leaned back, studying me. "What will you do now?" I looked at the letter again. The ink had faded, but the signature at the bottom gleamed as if it had been waiting for this moment. "Harold James Sterling," I read aloud. The name carried weight, history, and irony. The man whose company powered half the state, now powering the woman his family never acknowledged. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I'll start by buying myself a decent cup of coffee." Avery laughed so hard he nearly spilled his. "That's the spirit. But something tells me you'll do more than that." "Maybe," I said, softly slipping the letter back into its envelope. "But right now, I just want to sit here and breathe like someone who finally matters again." We talked a little longer about my husband, about Evelyn, about the strange mercy of time. He promised to help me handle the paperwork and transfer everything quietly. As I stood to leave, he said, "Diana, one last thing." "Yes. Don't mistake silence for weakness. Your mother kept quiet to protect you. But you," he smiled, "you get to use your voice." I nodded, slipping the envelope into my purse. "Maybe I will?" The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds as I stepped outside. Dallas traffic roared in the distance. I held the letter against my chest and let the warmth sink in. For the first time since David's death, I didn't feel like someone's leftover obligation. I felt chosen. As I walked toward the bus stop, I opened the envelope one more time and read the name again at the bottom, just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. Harold J. Sterling. The ink shimmered faintly in the light, real, undeniable in mine. The letter from Harold Sterling didn't just change my life, it rewired something inside me. For weeks I'd been living like a shadow, careful, quiet, invisible. But the day I walked out of Avery Grant's office with that envelope in my purse and a key to a vault in my pocket, I felt my spine straighten for the first time in months. I wasn't anyone's burden anymore. I was a woman with options and a very patient kind of anger. Avery helped me set up everything. Think of it as a firewall, he said, his tone half lawyer, half mentor. We met in his office again the following week. The smell of old wood and ink filled the room. On his computer screen, he typed my new beginning into existence. DM Holdings LLC, my initials. Clean, neutral, invisible. A shell company, I asked. He smiled. A holding company. We'll register it in Delaware. No one will ever trace it to you unless you want them to. I raised an eyebrow. You sound like you've done this before. He chuckled. Retirement's boring without a little paperwork espionage. We spent 2 hours setting up accounts, assigning a mailing address, creating a digital signature. By the time we finished, I had something I hadn't felt in years control. When he handed me the finalized documents, I looked down at my name typed beneath the company title. President Diana M. McAllister. I traced the letters with my finger. President, I whispered. The word felt foreign, like trying on a crown in secret. Avery leaned back in his chair. Now, Diana, the question isn't whether you can. It's whether you will. I didn't know what he meant until later that night. It was 10 p.m. at the Lone Star Inn. Rita was sitting outside our rooms wearing her leopard robe, painting her nails bright red. She looked up when she saw me carrying my laptop. Lord, you look serious, she said. Either you're watching true crime or plotting one. Maybe both. I opened my laptop and began scrolling through local listings. I wasn't looking for revenge, just distraction. Something to take my mind off the sound of Kyle's voice calling me an extra mouth. Then I saw it. Property auction, 312 Oakview Apartments. Austin TX. My cursor froze. That was their building. Laura and Kyle's. I clicked the listing. Tax foreclosure. Outstanding balance, $48,000. Starting bid, $210,000. Auction in 48 hours. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. It felt like staring at fate wearing a real estate badge. Rita, I said slowly, turning the screen toward her. See this address? She squinted. Oakview Apartments. Honey, that sounds familiar. It should. That's where my daughter lives. Her eyes widened, then she started laughing. Oh, baby, you can't be thinking what I think you're thinking. I didn't answer. She slapped her knee. Bid, baby. Bid like Beyoncé, Rita. Stop. No, seriously. This is divine math. They threw you out and the Lord just listed the property on clearance. I tried to stay calm, but my pulse was racing. I whispered to myself, no, this is crazy. Rita leaned closer, grinning. Crazy girl, so was Noah building a boat in the desert. Now look who's dry. I laughed, despite myself. Maybe it was the caffeine from Avery's coffee still running through my veins. Maybe it was the ache in my chest that hadn't had anywhere to go. But that night, I signed up for the auction portal. 2 days later, I sat in a cafe across from the bus station, my laptop open, my heart pounding louder than the espresso machine. Rita insisted on coming along. She ordered an iced latte and 3 muffins for strength. You ready, boss lady? She said, nudging me. I shouldn't be doing this. She grinned. That's what makes it fun. The countdown timer appeared on screen 3 minutes until auction start. Each second felt like a heartbeat. Avery had wired the funds into DM Holdings' account that morning, enough to bid comfortably but not recklessly. He'd said, if you do this, do it clean. This isn't revenge, Diana, it's acquisition. At 10 a.m., the first bid popped up $210,000, then another $250,000, then $220,000. I hesitated, then clicked bid. $225,000. Rita gasped dramatically. She's in. The numbers kept climbing. The cafe around us blurred the hiss of milk steamers, clatter of cups, hum of conversation. All I could hear was the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the auction timer. $230,000, $235,000, $240,000. Who are these people, I muttered. Probably another landlord thinking they're buying a profit machine, Rita said. Well, guess what, honey? They're bidding against karma with a manicure. The barista called out large latte for Rita. She didn't move. Not now, I'm spiritually invested. The timer flashed red. 2 minutes remaining. The other bidder raised it again. $245,000. I hesitated. Avery's voice echoed in my head. Do it clean. Don't bid with anger. Bid with reason. I clicked. $250,000. The timer blinked. 60 seconds. Then the other bidder jumped again. $2,500. Rita whispered, It's just money, baby. His money, technically. I took a deep breath and clicked again. $260,000. My palms were sweating. 30 seconds. $265,000. Rita leaned closer, eyes wide. Girl, he's testing your faith. I looked at the screen. The reflection of my face stared back older, determined, strangely calm. I clicked one final time. $270,000. Then I sat back, heart hammering. The timer ticked down. 9. 8. The cafe seemed to fade away, leaving just the sound of that clock. For the first time in months, I felt alive, not surviving, but acting. 3. 1. The screen went blank for half a second. Then in bold blue letters across the center, you won. Rita screamed so loud the barista dropped a spoon. Oh my Lord, you did it. You actually did it. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. I'd just bought the building where my daughter and her husband had thrown me out. My hands shook as I whispered, half laughing, half stunned. This can't be real. Rita raised her coffee cup. To poetic justice and excellent Wi-Fi. I spent the rest of the day filling out transfer forms, confirming deposits, reading legal disclaimers that blurred together. It was all clean, legitimate, airtight. Avery called to congratulate me. Well done, he said. DM Holdings now owns Oak View Apartments. Don't you think it's ironic? I asked. He chuckled. No, Diana. I think it's math. When I hung up, I sat back in the cafe booth, staring out at the street. Cars rushed by. People carried on with their ordinary lives. But me, I had just bought the roof over the heads of the people who'd locked me out in the rain. I thought I'd feel vengeful. Instead, I felt strangely peaceful. It wasn't anger, it was gravity. What goes up must come down. What gets thrown out sometimes comes back through the front door holding the deed. I looked again at my laptop screen, still glowing with those two words that had changed everything. You won. And for the first time in years, I actually believed it. The morning after the auction felt like waking up from a dream that had accidentally turned into a business plan. The paperwork was done. The wire transfers cleared. The legal notifications sent. DM Holdings, LLC was officially the new owner of 312 Oak View Apartments, the same building where my daughter had told me I was an extra mouth to feed. And now technically every single person in that building was feeding me. Avery called that morning. Congratulations, Madam Landlord. He said, his voice half amusement, half disbelief. I laughed softly. That sounds ridiculous. So is the situation. But here we are. We spent an hour going through logistics, insurance, maintenance, property management. He suggested hiring a local contractor to do minor repairs, someone reliable but discreet. That's how Samir Patel entered my life. Samir was in his early 40s with a kind face, oil-stained hands, and a sense of humor that could fix a bad day faster than a leaky pipe. When he showed up at the building that first morning, I was there too, under the guise of Ms. McAllister, consultant for the new ownership group. He tipped his cap. Morning, boss lady. You're the mysterious investor everyone's whispering about. Let's keep it that way, I said, smiling. We toured the property together. The paint was peeling in the stairwell, the mailboxes were rusting, and the elevator button for the second floor was taped down with a Band-Aid. Samir whistled. Whole place is held together with hope and duct tape. Then let's start with hope, I replied. Duct tape's too temporary. He laughed. I like you already. Over the next week, I met him every morning at 7, coffee in hand, clipboard ready. We replaced hallway lights, fixed leaks, patched drywall. I insisted on small touches, fresh paint, new mail slots, clean carpets. If I was going to own this building, it would be worthy of pride, not spite. Still, there was one detail I couldn't ignore. Apartment 3B, Laura and Kyle's unit. I avoided that floor like it was radioactive. I told Samir to focus on the lobby and basement first. He didn't ask questions. But one morning, as we stood near the boiler room, he caught me staring at the mailboxes. "Something about that one bothering you?" he asked. I hesitated. "Let's just say the last tenant and I have history." He grinned. "Ah, the ex-tenant blues? Happens to the best of us. Samir." I said deadpan, "Have you ever fixed karma before?" He leaned on his wrench, pretending to think. "Lady, that's above my pay grade." We both laughed. By the end of the week, the building looked better already. New lighting, cleaned staircases, repaired doors. Then came the next step: rental adjustments. The previous owner had been months behind on property taxes and maintenance. The place had been undervalued for years. Avery explained that fair market value meant I could legally increase rent for updated units. So I drafted the letters myself. Avery reviewed them, smiled approvingly, and said, "Objective, professional, lethal." I emailed the notices to the property manager, who sent them to all tenants. Each tenant would see a modest increase except one unit. Apartment 3B. Kyle and Laura's rent was doubled, not out of cruelty, but because poetic symmetry has its own math. 2 days later, I was back at my motel kitchenette making coffee on a tiny drip machine that hissed more than it brewed. My phone buzzed a voicemail from the building's management office. Kyle's voice filled the speaker, furious and shrill. "This is robbery. You can't just double rent like that. We'll take this to the board, to the city, if we have to." I stirred my coffee slowly, listening with the kind of calm that only comes from a solid cup of caffeine and righteous irony. When the voicemail ended, I smirked. "No, dear," I said softly to the empty room. "That's inflation." Rita knocked on the door, poking her head in with her usual grin. "You talking to yourself or to Karma? Again, Karma's returning my calls today," I said, pouring her a cup. She sat down, sipping noisily. "So, how's the empire under renovation?" I said. Meaning, I've got one tenant who's about to learn the difference between arrogance and rent control." Rita cackled. "Oh, baby, I like this version of you. Cold brew and cold-blooded. Not cold," I corrected. "Calculated." Later that afternoon, I drove to the building just to see it with fresh eyes. It looked alive. Clean windows, repainted entryway. Even the flower bed by the door had new soil. I watched from across the street as tenants came and went. Young couples, an old man with groceries, a mother pushing a stroller. And then I saw Laura. She stepped out carrying a laundry basket, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her shoulders slumped under the Texas sun. She looked tired. Not the polished, smiling daughter I remembered. For a moment, my chest tightened. Then I saw Kyle step out behind her, barking into his phone, still in his work shirt, still angry at the world. Whatever sympathy I felt evaporated. They loaded their laundry into the car. Kyle slammed the trunk. Laura flinched. He didn't notice. I turned away, climbed back into my car, and whispered to myself, "Fix the building. Let the rest fix itself." That night, I made myself a real dinner for the first time in weeks. Pasta, garlic bread, a glass of wine I didn't even like but felt I deserved. Halfway through the meal, my phone rang. Unknown number. I wiped my hands, picked it up. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a familiar, hesitant voice. "Mom." I froze. "Laura." "Yeah." She took a shaky breath. "Something weird's going on with our rent. The building got a new owner and the price, it just doubled overnight. I don't know what's happening. Kyle's furious. I thought maybe you'd know someone. Maybe you could..." Help. Her words trembled, as if she was holding them together with leftover pride. I looked at the half-empty wine glass, the folder of property documents open beside me, the logo DM Holdings gleaming faintly on the letterhead. My thumb brushed the edge of the paper. For a long moment, I said nothing. "Mom, are you there?" I took a slow breath. My heart ached, but my voice stayed calm. "Yes, sweetheart," I said finally. "I'm here." And then silence. I didn't explain. I didn't lie. I just let the silence do what it does best, speak louder than words ever could. The phone buzzed again after she hung up another voicemail from Kyle, this time, his voice angrier, louder, desperate. But I didn't listen. I walked to the window, coffee mug in hand, watching the city lights blink against the dark. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was gravity. And for once, I wasn't the one falling. When the first wave of rent increases hit, most tenants sighed, grumbled, and adjusted their budgets. Except one. Kyle Harmon didn't just complain, he declared war. It started with emails to the management office. Angry, typo-filled late-night tirades titled things like rent extortion and who do you people think you are. Then came the phone calls, voicemail after voicemail of pure venom. By the third day, the property manager, a polite young man named Curtis, was shaking when he called me. Ms. McAllister, Ms. DM, Mr. Harmon's been in the office 3 times this week. He's demanding to know the owner's name. I've deflected, but he's intense. Intense? I asked. Curtis sighed. He slammed his hand on the desk and yelled, "Tell your boss I don't answer to ghosts." I smiled faintly. "Then don't exercise me. Just keep doing your job." I hung up, slipped my sunglasses on, and whispered to myself, "Let the man chase shadows." 2 days later, I decided to inspect the building myself, quietly. It was early morning, cool, cloudy, the kind of Texas dawn that smelled faintly of wet asphalt and burnt coffee. I wore a beige trench coat, wide-brimmed hat, and dark glasses, an outfit straight out of a spy movie if the spy had a bad hip and sensible shoes. Samir met me in the parking lot holding a toolbox and his eternal grin. "Morning, Ms. Mystery," he said. "Come to see your kingdom." "More like to make sure the peasants aren't revolting," I replied. He laughed so hard he almost dropped his wrench. "You're something else, lady." We walked the perimeter, checked locks, lights, cameras. Everything worked perfectly, at least until I rounded the corner to the main hallway and nearly collided with Laura. She was carrying grocery bags, her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept. She brushed past me, murmuring, "Yeah, Kyle's furious. I don't know Mom hasn't called back. I'll figure something out." My breath hitched. I froze mid-step, inches away. For a heartbeat, I thought she recognized me, but she didn't even glance up, just passed me by, her perfume fading into the air behind her like a ghost of our old life. I waited until the elevator doors closed before I exhaled. Samir noticed my face. "Old memories. Old mistakes," I whispered. By afternoon, the building was humming with rumors. Someone had told someone that the new owner was a corporation from Houston. Someone else swore it was a hedge fund from New York. And Kyle was certain it was personal. He stormed into the management office at noon, fists balled, voice booming. Curtis tried to stay calm behind his desk. "I'm not leaving until I get a name," Kyle shouted. "Who's the landlord? Who's behind this, sir? I've told you before, DM Holdings handles multiple properties. The owner remains private." "Private?" Kyle sneered. "You think you can hide forever? Nobody hides from me." He slammed his hand on the desk so hard a pen rolled off and hit the floor. Curtis flinched. From the hallway, Samir watched silently, his phone already half raised. When Kyle finally stormed out, Samir muttered under his breath, "Somebody needs a hobby." That evening, he texted me a simple update. "Your favorite tenant's on the warpath again." I replied, "Let him swing. Eventually, gravity wins." But Kyle wasn't just angry, he was obsessed. He started watching people, following maintenance workers, taking pictures of clipboards, asking questions. He even cornered Samir by the dumpster one night. "You work for them, right?" Kyle growled. "The company. You know who it is." Samir blinked. "I work for whoever signs the checks, man. And right now, that's a very happy person who doesn't like being bothered." Kyle scowled. "So you do know." Samir raised an eyebrow. "You're talking to a guy fixing your water heater. You think I get invited to board meetings? Don't play dumb." Kyle said, stepping closer. Samir didn't move. "I don't play at all. I fix things. Except tempers that's above my pay grade." He walked away whistling. When he told me later, I couldn't help but laugh. "Samir, I said you might have just saved him from a lawsuit." "Lady," he chuckled, "you pay me to fix leaks, not men." But things escalated. That Friday night around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. Samir again this time, no jokes. He's here, on the roof, messing with your cameras. I was still awake, sitting in my apartment with a cup of tea and the building's security feed open on my laptop. The screen flickered, then showed a grainy black and white image of Kyle Harmon climbing the stairwell to the roof, a flashlight clutched in one hand, wire cutters in the other. He looked wild hair, messy eyes, darting the kind of paranoia that eats its own tail. I pressed the speaker button. "Samir, where are you, North Stairwell? I'm heading up. Should I stop him? Don't touch him. Just film everything." I zoomed in on the rooftop feed. Kyle crouched near the main camera, fumbling with the casing. He yanked a wire, cursed, then tried another. The feed glitched. "Come on," I muttered under my breath. He looked up suddenly, scanning the shadows like he could feel me watching through the lens. Samir's voice came faintly through the phone, out of breath. "He's trying to mess with your system, ma'am. What do you want me to do? Keep recording," I said, "and stay safe." The camera flickered again. For a moment, the image froze on Kyle's face, sweat-dripping eyes, wild teeth clenched. Then he reached deeper into the circuit box. I leaned closer to the screen, heart hammering. "You picked the wrong wire, Kyle," I whispered. A second later, the rooftop lights flashed and the feed cut to black. For half a minute, I just sat there staring at the dark screen pulse roaring in my ears. Then my phone buzzed again, Samir whispering, "He's fine, but, he just electrocuted himself a little. Not bad, just enough to remember Newton's law." I exhaled, part relief, part exasperation. Good grief, is he conscious? "Oh yeah, he's cursing at the stars. Might sue the universe next." I couldn't help it, I laughed. A low, tired laugh that came from somewhere deep where exhaustion meets vindication. "File a report," I told him. "Security breach, vandalism, self-inflicted stupidity. Keep it official. You got it, boss." When I hung up, the screen was still black, but I didn't feel blind. I'd seen enough. Kyle wasn't just paranoid, he was unraveling. And unraveling men have a way of pulling everyone down with them. The next morning, the camera feed came back online. Samir had repaired it before dawn. The first image it captured was of Kyle walking out to his car, one arm bandaged, sunglasses on jaw, set in humiliation. I watched him drive off, tires screeching, ego limping. Somewhere Laura would ask what happened, and somewhere he'd lie. But the cameras would keep rolling, and I'd keep watching. Because being invisible wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about seeing everything. And if Kyle thought he could fight a ghost, he was about to learn that some ghosts own the whole building. When you've lived invisible long enough, people forget you were ever there. That's the funny thing about silence, it doesn't disappear. It just waits. And that night, in the fluorescent glow of the Oakview apartment common room, silence waited for me to speak. The building management had called it a mandatory tenants meeting. The agenda looked harmless enough: updates on maintenance, repairs, rent adjustments. But everyone knew it was about one thing: the new owner, the mystery landlord, the ghost behind the rising rent. I arrived early, dressed in charcoal gray slacks, a simple blouse, and a long beige coat. Hair tied back, sunglasses tucked into my purse, calm, anonymous. Avery Grant was beside me, immaculate as ever in his dark suit and steady confidence. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "I do," I said quietly. "Ghosts can't own buildings forever." We stood near the back as the room filled. The chatter grew louder, residents murmuring, chairs, scraping a baby, fussing in someone's arms. Then came him. Kyle burst through the doorway with Laura trailing behind him. His face was tight with fury, his jaw clenched like it was holding back a volcano. He scanned the room, barking, "Where's the management? We're not starting until someone explains this rent hike scam." Laura tugged his sleeve, whispering something, but he shrugged her off. She looked exhausted, hair pulled into a limp ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. I turned slightly so she couldn't see me yet. Curtis, the young property manager, stepped up to the front, clutching a clipboard like a shield. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting. We'll go over upcoming renovations, safety upgrades, and new community guidelines." Kyle scoffed loudly. "Cut the act, kid. We all know why we're here. We want the name of whoever's behind DM Holdings." Curtis faltered. "Sir, if you'll allow me." Kyle slammed his hand on the folding table. "No. You'll answer me now." The room rippled with murmurs. A few tenants exchanged nervous glances. That's when Avery stepped forward, calm as a man strolling through a storm. Perhaps I can help, he said smoothly. My name is Avery Grant, legal representative for DM Holdings. I'll be happy to address your concerns. Kyle narrowed his eyes. So you're the puppet. Who's pulling your strings? Avery smiled faintly. Patience, Mr. Harmon. The owner is here tonight. You'll meet them shortly. Laura's eyes darted around the room. They're here, she whispered almost to herself. I stayed in the back corner invisible, watching the storm build. Curtis cleared his throat nervously. Before we continue, I'd like to thank our new owner for attending this evening and for investing in improving the property. Everyone please welcome Avery gave a small nod toward me. DM Holdings. For a moment, the words just hung there, meaningless to most ears. Then I stepped forward. The click of my heels on the linoleum floor echoed louder than any shout. Kyle turned mid-sentence, his mouth still open. Laura froze, eyes wide. I stopped in front of the group, hands clasped calmly in front of me. Good evening, I said, voice steady. My name is Diana McAllister. I'm the owner of this building. It was like someone had unplugged the room. No one spoke. No one even breathed. Then one by one, heads turned toward Kyle. He blinked. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Laura covered her mouth with both hands, tears pooling in her eyes. The silence stretched until it hummed. Then from the back of the room, a familiar voice broke through, loud, unapologetic, and delightfully off-script. Well, I'll be damned, it was Rita. In her leopard print scarf, fresh lipstick, and oversized sunglasses, she stood up from the folding chair and clapped like she'd just seen Beyoncé live. I told you, baby, I told you, she hollered, laughing. Half the tenants startled. A few even joined in, unsure if it was appropriate, but too entertained to care. I couldn't help it. I smiled. Rita winked at me. You go get your applause, sugar. Kyle's voice finally returned low and trembling with disbelief. You, he hissed. You own this building. I met his eyes. Calm. Level. Yes. He took a step forward. You did this to us on purpose. You raised the rent, made us panic just to humiliate me. No, I said softly. To remind you that the world doesn't revolve around your paycheck. Laughter rippled quietly from somewhere in the back. Kyle's face flushed red. You think this is funny? No, I said again. My voice like still water. I think it's fair. Laura's tears finally spilled over. Mom, she whispered, why didn't you tell me? I looked at her, my chest aching. Because you wouldn't have believed me. Her lips trembled. I'm sorry. Not yet, I said gently. But maybe someday. Avery cleared his throat, stepping in before emotion overtook the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said smoothly, Ms. McAllister's ownership is fully documented and verified. Every renovation and adjustment has been within legal limits and market standards. She's not your enemy. She's your landlord, the crowd murmured. Someone whispered, well, at least she fixes stuff. Another added, yeah, the new paint looks great. Avery smiled. See progress. But Kyle wasn't listening. He was staring at me with a look that made the air feel colder. He took one slow step forward. You think this is over? Avery raised a hand. Mr. Harmon Kyle ignored him. His voice rose low but venomous. You made an enemy tonight, Diana. A real one. The room fell dead silent. I looked at him steadily. You already were. His jaw twitched. Then he turned sharply, grabbing Laura by the arm. We're leaving. Wait, Kyle. But he yanked her toward the door. She stumbled, glanced back at me, eyes filled with something between guilt and fear. Then they were gone. The tension broke slowly. A tenant coughed. Someone asked about laundry machines. Rita plopped back into her chair, muttering, whew, that was better than cable. Avery leaned over to me. You handled that with remarkable restraint. I took a deep breath, finally letting my hands shake just a little. That wasn't restraint, Avery. That was history. He smiled faintly. History with good lighting. I laughed quietly. The sound surprised even me. When the meeting ended, the crowd trickled out into the warm night air. I stayed behind, standing near the empty chairs and coffee-stained tables. Through the window, I could see Kyle and Laura arguing in the parking lot, his hands waving, her face buried in her palms. Avery put a hand on my shoulder. "You know he's not the kind of man who takes defeat gracefully." "I know," I said softly, "but neither am I." He nodded approvingly. "Then maybe it's time the ghosts stopped hiding." Outside, thunder rumbled low in the distance. A storm was coming, and for the first time, I didn't plan to run from it. I picked up my coat, looked at the reflection of the room in the glass, and whispered to myself, "You wanted a villain, Kyle. Congratulations, you just met your landlord." The night after the tenant meeting, the air around Oakview changed. The silence wasn't peace anymore, it was pressure. Something brittle, waiting to snap. I knew it wouldn't take Kyle long to make his next move. Men like him can't stand losing control. They don't grieve, they plot. And he didn't disappoint. 3 days later, an email slid into my inbox subject line. "Let's make this public." I opened it calm, already knowing who it was from. The message was long, erratic, full of threats typed in all caps and poorly hidden desperation. "You think you're clever, Diana? I know about you, about your mother, about Sterling. The affair, the money, oh yes, the money. You think people won't care? They will. How's it going to look when the press finds out the widow landlord bought a building with dirty secrets? Fix this. Undo the rent, or I'll undo you. No signature, no subtlety. Just Kyle loud even when he whispered." I read it twice, then laughed softly to myself. Poor man. He thought gossip could wound someone who'd already lived through humiliation, eviction, and grief. I'd already been erased once. There was nothing left for him to take. I forwarded the message to Avery with a note, "Your move, counselor." His reply came within the hour. "Oh, I've been waiting for this." The next morning, Kyle received a hand-delivered envelope. Inside, a neatly typed letter on ivory paper, stamped with Avery's firm crest. "Cease and desist notice to Mr. Kyle Harmon. Your recent communications constitute harassment, defamation, and blackmail under Texas Civil Code, Paragraph 73.01 and Paragraph 42.07. Any further action will result in immediate legal response and criminal investigation." At the bottom, Avery had signed it with elegant precision. Underneath, in my own handwriting, I'd added one small line in blue ink. "The truth doesn't scare me, Kyle, but it should scare you." That should have been the end of it. But Kyle wasn't a man who could read between the lines. He needed the lines to hit him across the face. So when intimidation failed, he turned to desperation. Late one Thursday night, while the rest of the building slept, Kyle broke into the management office. It was just past midnight. The security footage would later show it all in perfect detail. A dark hoodie, gloves, a flashlight beam darting across the walls. He moved like a man who believed he was invisible. He went straight for the file cabinet labeled Ownership and Leasing Records. He yanked drawers open, flipping through folders, muttering under his breath. Then he found it, a folder stamped DM Holdings, LLC. He stuffed it into his backpack, unaware of the blinking red light above the door. At 2:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Samir. "Boss," he whispered, "you're gonna want to check camera 3. I opened the security feed from my laptop. The screen showed Kyle's face in high-definition sweat panic and the faint reflection of guilt in his own flashlight. For 30 seconds, I just watched. Not out of shock, but out of pure, quiet disbelief at how predictable he'd become. Then I hit record. By morning, Avery had the footage. He filed a report with the Austin Police Department before I'd even finished my coffee. Broke and entered with intent to defraud, he summarized sipping tea as if reading the weather. Judges love this sort of neat, self-incriminating evidence. I nodded. "Make sure the report gets logged before he realizes what he's done." "Oh, it's already on record," he said, "but I assume you want him to see it too." I smiled. Of course. That afternoon, I drafted an email to Laura. The subject line read, "You need to see this." Inside, I wrote just one sentence. "The man you're protecting is about to destroy himself and you along with him." Then I attached the footage, a single unedited file. Kyle Harmon Camera 3 Move. It showed everything: the forced lock, the stolen folder, the frantic search, the way he slipped the documents into his bag. At one point, he even muttered, "Got you now, lady," under his breath. I stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing send. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the golden light fade into a bruised blue sky. The phone sat silent beside me. Part of me expected an angry call from Kyle. Another part hoped for a tearful one from Laura. But for hours, there was nothing. Just the hum of traffic and the soft buzz of cicadas. Until finally, around 9 p.m., my phone chimed. A new email from Laura. No subject line. Just an attachment, a photo. It showed their apartment table, Kyle's backpack wide open, inside the stolen folder. Her message read, "I saw the video. I didn't want to believe it, but I do now. I don't know who he is anymore." Then one final line. "Thank you for showing me the truth, even if it hurts." At that exact moment, in apartment 3B, another story was unfolding. The camera in the hallway caught it. Laura stood by the doorcoat, draped over her arm car keys in hand. Kyle was pacing behind her, shouting, his face red, his movements frantic. She said something sharp and final. He froze. Then she reached for the doorknob. He tried to stop her. She didn't even look back. She just walked out, head-high, keys clutched tight, the door slamming behind her with the force of an ending that had been waiting too long. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just closed my laptop and whispered into the empty room she finally saw. For months, I'd been fighting for dignity, for power, for peace. But this moment wasn't about any of that. It was about truth, the kind that burns down what lies have built. And as much as I wanted to comfort her, I knew I couldn't, because some truths have to be survived, not explained. I poured another cup of tea, watching the steam rise and fade. Somewhere across town, Laura was driving into the night, leaving behind a man who'd finally met his match, not in another man, but in the consequences he'd built with his own hands. The email notification pinged again, a reply from Avery this time. Footage submitted. Police acknowledged. Well played, Ms. McAllister. I smiled faintly and turned off the screen. Outside, the city lights flickered like 1,000 tiny verdicts, and I thought to myself, let him rage. Let him run. Because I've already won. The rain started just after midnight, the kind that doesn't roar, just whispers against the windows like it's trying to confess something. I was half asleep on the couch when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was the storm. Then it rang again, longer this time, urgent. When I opened the door, Laura stood there drenched from head to toe, hair plastered to her cheeks, mascara washed away. In her hands, wrapped in a soaked towel, was a familiar object, my mother's diary. "Mom," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. No words, just motion, just breath. She sank into the old armchair across from me, clutching the diary like it might fall apart if she let go. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain filled the silence between us, steady and slow, like it was giving us time to rebuild something fragile. Finally, Laura looked up. Her voice cracked. "I found this in Kyle's stuff. He must have taken it when we helped you move out." I didn't even know he had it. I nodded, reaching for a blanket, draping it over her shoulders. He took a lot of things that didn't belong to him. She looked down at the diary again, running her fingers over the water-stained cover. "I read it, Mom. All of it. About Grandma. About Harold Sterling. About what she fought through." Her voice trembled. "She wasn't a scandal. She was a survivor." "She was," I said quietly. "And she left proof of it in every line." Laura opened the diary. The pages crackled softly. We sat shoulder to shoulder, the lamplight warm against the rain outside. She read aloud from one entry, her voice fragile. "He called me wicked for wanting independence. But wickedness to men like him is simply a woman's refusal to kneel." Laura closed the book, tears spilling. I let him turn me into someone I don't even recognize, Mom. I stopped standing up for myself, for us. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet, things would get better. I looked at her the same way my mother once looked at me, steady, without pity. Then start being who you were before fear found you, I said softly. She met my eyes searching, then nodded. You didn't raise me to be weak. No, I said. I raised you to be kind. The rest you learned from life. For a while, we didn't speak. We just sat there listening to the thunder roll somewhere far away. The sound wasn't frightening, it was cleansing. Laura leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm leaving him for good this time. I already called a lawyer. Avery gave me the number. I exhaled slowly, half relief, half sorrow. It's not easy to rebuild after a fire. She smiled faintly through the tears. Then I'll start with ashes. Her words hung in the air, glowing with quiet defiance. A moment later, my phone buzzed. Rita, of course. Her message read, "Tell Kyle rent's due. Triple now." No exceptions, baby, I snorted, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed, really laughed. The sound startled both of us. Laura wiped her eyes, grinning through the tears. You and your friends are ruthless. I handed her the phone so she could read the message herself. We prefer the term efficient. She giggled softly, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard since she was little, when she used to bake cookies with me in that same kitchen. For a brief moment, the years between us melted away. I got up, poured her a cup of chamomile tea, and brought one for myself. When she took the first sip, her hands stopped trembling. You know, she said, staring into the cup, he always said you were manipulative, controlling. But you're not. You're just strong. I think that scared him. I smiled faintly. Strength tends to frighten people who've built their lives on someone else's silence. She nodded, voice low. He used to call me dramatic, but tonight when I left, I didn't cry. I didn't even shout. I just took the keys and walked out. I touched her hand gently. Sometimes the quietest exits are the loudest statements. The storm outside softened into drizzle. We spent the next hour talking not about Kyle, but about memories, about Grandma Evelyn's stubbornness, her recipes, her letters, the old house she fought to keep. We read the last page of the diary together, written in Evelyn's looping handwriting. If my daughter ever doubts her worth, let her remember our blood builds, it doesn't beg. Laura whispered the words twice as if engraving them into her bones. Then she closed the diary and pressed it to her chest. I want to do something with this, she said. Make sure people remember her the right way. I nodded. Maybe that's what she wanted all along, to be remembered for her fight, not her fall. At 2 a.m., Avery called. His voice was calm, but I could hear the faint satisfaction behind it. Diana, he said, you might want to sit down. I smiled. I am. Well, good, because I have news. What now he's gone? Avery said simply. Fled town late this afternoon. His car's been spotted heading west. He won't be back. I exhaled a slow release that felt like a decade leaving my lungs. And legally, you've won Diana. Officially. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle in. You've won. It wasn't joy, I felt it was relief, warm and quiet, like sunlight finally touching something long frozen. Thank you, Avery, I whispered. You did the hard part, he replied. You stayed standing. After I hung up, I sat back beside Laura, who had drifted half asleep under the blanket. The diary rested on her lap, her fingers still lightly touching the cover, as if she were guarding it. Outside, the last drops of rain slipped down the window pane, catching the streetlights like falling glass. I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, whispering the same thing my mother once told me, you rise even when it hurts. That's what McAllister women do. She stirred, smiling in her sleep. Like a phoenix, she murmured. Yes, I said softly, exactly like a phoenix. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not victory, not vengeance, just balance. The kind that comes when you've stopped running from the fire and started walking through it. The world outside was washed clean, and in the reflection of the rain-streaked glass, I saw not an old woman, not a victim, but a survivor, holding a legacy in her hands. I took a final sip of my tea, glanced at my silent phone, and smiled, because for once silence didn't mean defeat. It meant closure. Freedom doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives in a lawyer's envelope or a single word over the phone official. But for me, freedom came a few weeks later with the sound of a for sale sign being hammered into the front lawn of the building I once called my battlefield. I sold Oakview Apartments quietly. No announcement, no press. Just a signature, a handshake, and a long breath. I didn't know I'd been holding since the day Kyle called me an extra mouth to feed. The offer came from a community housing nonprofit, a group that promised to maintain the building and keep rent fair. Avery handled the papers. He was smiling when we met in his office for the last time. "Well, Madam Former Landlord," he said, handing me a folder, "you've turned a nightmare into equity. And equity, as I like to say, is just emotional justice with interest." I laughed. "Then let's make sure it pays forward." Inside the folder was my final instruction, half of the profit, over $600,000, transferred directly to a new foundation, Evelyn House, named after my mother, built to help women like her and like me find their footing again after the ground had been taken from under them. The day the donation cleared, I drove down to the address I hadn't seen in years, 142 Willow Creek Drive, Round Rock, Texas, my old home. It looked smaller now, tucked behind a row of newer houses. The paint was faded, the porch railing crooked. But it was mine again. The first thing I did was walk to the backyard where the garden used to be. Only weeds grew there, now tangled and stubborn. But the soil still smelled the same rich and alive. Laura joined me that afternoon, pulling up in her small sedan. She stepped out wearing an old t-shirt, a paint roller in one hand, and determination in her eyes. "Don't say a word," she warned with a smile. "I already bought the brushes and lemonade." I couldn't help but laugh. "You sound like your grandmother." She grinned. "Then I'm doing something right." We spent the next few days painting the porch, fixing loose boards, and planting new flowers. Lavender, daisies, rosemary, the same ones Evelyn had grown decades ago. Laura hummed as she worked the tune, faint and familiar. Every now and then she'd stop and look at me, her expression soft but certain. It wasn't the look of a daughter who pitied her mother. It was the look of a woman who finally understood her. One evening, while the sun dipped low and the air smelled like fresh paint and rain-soaked earth, Laura carried 2 mugs of tea to the porch swing. We sat there side by side, the boards creaking gently beneath our feet. For the first time in a long while, everything was still. Laura sipped her tea, staring at the horizon. "You didn't just buy a building, Mom," she said quietly. "You bought your dignity back." I smiled, feeling the warmth of the mug seep into my palms. "No, sweetie," I said. "I just collected the rent life owed me." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's such a you thing to say." We fell into silence again, the good kind. The kind filled with cicadas, distant wind chimes, and second chances. I looked out at the garden, new flowers blooming where the old ones had once been crushed by neglect. There was a kind of poetry in it, the same quiet logic that guided my mother's diary and every decision since. A clause written not in contracts, but in courage. I called it the garden clause. The understanding that sometimes you have to prune the past to make space for what's next. Later that week, Avery sent me the final paperwork. Title transfer completed, donation recorded, all accounts settled. The last page bore my signature, followed by a simple note he'd typed at the bottom. "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it grows." I pinned that line to the fridge. Right next to a photo, Laura and I took that morning paint on our hands, smiles on our faces, the house shining behind us like a second sunrise. Rita, of course, texted the moment she saw the post. "You're glowing, baby. Tell Kyle rent's still due." Triple now, I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. Some people never change, and thank goodness for that. The weeks that followed were quiet but full. Laura helped set up the Evelyn House website, working with Avery and a small local team. I visited the first shelter we partnered with, a small home for women escaping abuse just outside Austin. They asked me to speak at the opening ceremony. I said no at first, but they insisted. So I stood before a room full of women, some holding children, some holding hope, and told them what my mother once told me: strength isn't loud. It's persistent. It keeps showing up even when nobody claps. When the applause came, it was gentle but real. and for the first time, I didn't hide from it. Now, sitting here on this porch, I can finally breathe without waiting for the next blow. The sun sets in gold ribbons over the fields. The swing sways lightly beneath us. Laura leans her head on my shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did it, Mom." "No," I correct softly. "We did." She nods. The air smells of fresh paint-cut grass and peace hard-earned. I close my eyes, feeling the warmth on my skin, and let the world go still. They once called me an extra mouth. Turns out I was the one who fed the story. Have you ever been underestimated and came back stronger? Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of justice and redemption. You know, stories like this aren't just about revenge. They're about rediscovery, about learning that dignity doesn't come from what others give you, it comes from what you refuse to lose. If you've ever been told you were too much, too old, or not needed anymore, remember Diana's story. Because sometimes the best way to answer doubt is to rebuild quietly until your peace becomes proof. Now, before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your stories keep this channel alive, and your strength inspires the next one we tell. And if you haven't already hit subscribe, tap the bell icon and stay with us for more real stories of justice, healing, and redemption. See you in the next story.